know that when you talk about a green economy on a day that's sunny or semi-sunny, some folks are out there. I also know that 3:30 is often our start time here at the New America Foundation, so we may have guests come in late, and I'd like you to make space for them when they do come in. I'm Steve Clemens. I direct the American Strategy Program at the New America Foundation, and I am pleased to be doing an event that I've been wanting to do for a long time. We hosted Mike Splinter and Applied Materials up on Capitol Hill some time ago in the Senate Energy Committee for a really dramatic evening. The slides and the multi-dimensional framing behind Mike were stunning. We had my friend who's staff director of the Energy Committee said they've never had anything like that up there before and not since. And it was a dramatic moment, and I'm going to say a few words about Mike Splinter in a moment, but we were partners then, and we're partners today in working with the Solar Energy Association, and Ron Resch is here to say a few words, and I want to introduce him, and thank you for partnering and helping to bring together our crowd today. So, Ron, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you all for attending. I just want to take a couple of quick minutes to kind of tee up what's happening in the solar industry in the United States. 2007 was a record year for solar in the U.S. We saw the photovoltaic industry grow by about 45% in the U.S. The solar water heating industry grew by over 50%, and the first new concentrating solar power project in the U.S. came online in Boulder City, Nevada. All very exciting events. All events directly attributable to the federal investment tax credit that was passed in the 2005 energy bill. Great news. The United States finally starting to see these green jobs come to the United States. We're starting to develop renewable energy technologies that are going to improve our energy independence and our energy security while addressing global warming. Bad news is these tax credits are set to expire at the end of this year. So when Congress enacted these tax credits, they passed a tax credit for 2 years. You cannot build an industry on a 2-year tax credit. Just to give you some comparison, the clean coal industry was given 12 years in the 2005 energy bill. The new nukes industry, 15 years. Congress had enough vision to say it takes a while to build an industry in that particular instance. But with respect to renewables, they continue to give us a 1-year or a 2-year incentive. Now let me just compare that to what's happening in other countries around the world. Germany, the global leader in the photovoltaic industry, who installs about 8 times as much solar each year as the entire United States, passed an initiative that lasted 20 years long. The result of that initiative is that in the first 4 years, they've created over 150,000 jobs in Germany, over 40,000 actual manufacturing jobs in Eastern Germany alone. Think about that, okay? As we are looking at the highest unemployment rates in the country being in our manufacturing sectors of Michigan and Ohio and areas of Louisiana, why wouldn't we as a country put in place incentives that encourage the growth of new manufacturing jobs here in the United States? You look at China. China is making a massive investment in renewable energy technologies because they know that is the next great high-tech growth industry. They're going to see those jobs. It would be smart if Congress actually stepped up and ensured that those jobs are created here in the United States as well. The good news is that Congress, right at this point, is putting together an extenders bill. This is a clean energy package as well as some other provisions that are going to be included. The Ways and Means Committee will introduce this bill later this afternoon, and it will go to markup actually tomorrow around 10 or 10:30. We are calling on Congress that now is the time to ensure that we create these jobs here in the United States. And specifically for solar, we're asking Congress to pass an 8-year extension of the investment tax credit for commercial solar, a 6-year extension for the residential tax credit, but most importantly on the residential side to lift the cap. Currently there's a $2,000 cap on the residential tax credit. So what they're basically saying is we're going to call it a 30% tax credit, but we're only going to give you 5%. So we really want Congress to step up and make sure that solar becomes an important part of our mix going forward. Let's watch, see what happens. Let's make sure that Congress does enact some stuff. This is an election year, though, and unfortunately, solar very quickly has become the political football of 2008. Hopefully, leadership will step forward and make sure that this football gets over the end zone and we'll see solar growth here in the U.S. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ron. I should mention as well that we've got quite a number of people watching live on the web right now. I wish we could take their questions and comments. We're going to have Mike Splinter share his views, but let me share a few words. I've had the pleasure of knowing Mike Splinter probably longer than he knew me, but I was paying attention to him when I was working for Senator Jeff Bingaman He was in Intel family at the time, and Intel was New Mexico's largest employer. And at the time, the big challenge in the state of New Mexico, and I sort of take partial credit for it, was moving from 48th per capita income in the country to 47th, and we made it during my 3-year term in the Senate. And part of what we were trying to do was to encourage Asia-Pacific trade to begin looking at people who were looking at their circumstances in economic development. And what Mike was doing, not just playing with Intel's facilities, in which he was head of global plants and facilities, I think worldwide and investment, was to look at the many other spin-offs. And we have more PhDs in New Mexico, despite the relative American poverty rate, than anywhere else in the country. And you had the national labs, you had folks focused on energy, you had folks in the semiconductor business, the chip facility. And what you feel is happening, what I feel is happening in the global business environment, but also in a lot of other spheres, is that we're another moment of great discontinuity where we're having to rethink energy, we're having to rethink the patterns of interaction, have to rethink business, we're having to rethink about how we all are part of this evolving next world. And incrementalism doesn't really get you very far when you do it. And I've been very interested, since Mike has moved over to Applied Materials, which is another firm with whom I was close. James Morgan was very close with my former boss, many of my former bosses, in fact, the CEO of Applied Materials who preceded Mike, is that Applied Materials has jumped into the solar business and to try to think ahead. And when he did speak for us in the Senate Energy Committee, it was transformational for me in terms of understanding some of the different dynamics at play in the not only energy system and renewable, but looking at, one, how logical this is and how tough it is to get there. A very good friend of the New America Foundation is the Assistant Secretary of Energy for Renewables, Andy Karsner. And I've spent a lot of time with him, and he's a real crusader. We also have as one of our senior fellows at the New America Foundation, Terry Tamminen, who was the right-hand guy to Arnold Schwarzenegger in his environmental work, and he's sort of turning Arnold, I'm sure it's unconstitutional, but somehow his own foreign policy manager of cooking up treaties with provinces in Australia and Germany and New Zealand that's looking at questions of renewables and energy conservation and new site. So this is a new terrain, and it is fascinating to see how the business community is trying to innovate in this arena. And I wanted to give this preamble to this talk because I think that what Applied Materials is doing in terms of pivoting some of its own business interests, dealing a lot with Asia, but then looking at the gaps in the United States itself, which is faced with so many fundamental challenges, not just of the R&D tax credit, though I support that, but on a lot of other things where we're just not there yet conceptually, and we should be. And I think it's fascinating to listen and bring into our civil society discussions and public policy discussions innovators from the business community who are trying to solve these problems and get a sense of how hard it is for them to actually get the public policy community to listen. So I am a huge fan of Mike Splinter, who's president and CEO of Applied Materials, and the Applied Materials staff for bringing this here, making us part of it, and hopefully New America through Terry Tamminen, our web folks, the blogosphere, and others can help play a part in what you're trying to do. I'll be back for Q&A, but please give a round of welcome applause to Mike Splinter.
Thanks, Steve. It's a pleasure for me to be here this afternoon. Steve was right. About a year ago, I was here with graphics and a few other things. We won't have any graphics this afternoon. We'll just have this wonderful backdrop of the New America Foundation. In fact, I came to an event at the Senate building last year, and I spoke about the capability of solar and what it could do and how fast it could move. And at that time, I talked that we really needed to extend the investment tax credit. That, I thought, was the first and most simple thing to do. Well, as our governor would say, I'm back. Can't quite say it the way he does, but yeah, I'm working on my Austrian accent, but I'm back. And not much has happened with policy, frankly. And I think that's a big problem because a lot has happened in the energy area. You just have to think about some of the pricing. Coal, during this last year, price of coal has doubled. Price of natural gas is up 45%. And if you want to bring that a little closer to home or closer to your wallets, what's happening in Maryland, I believe that the average electric bill in Maryland will be up $137, or that's what the published number is. I know people in Maryland who are saying their electric bill is going to be up 72% in this over last year. Electric companies in Virginia are also raising rates by almost 30%. These things are happening fast. And if you listen to Goldman Sachs' comments about price of oil, their view of oil at $125 now, oil can go to $200 a barrel. Those are significant changes, and I just wish that we could establish policy as quickly as energy companies can change prices. I think it would be a lot better for America and a lot better for our competitiveness. Certainly this is a town of speeches and debate. It's what we do, but climate change is not a spectator sport. This is an area that requires we do something. And while we argue, there's one thing that should be pretty obvious to all of us, and that is that we're headed toward a low-carbon economy. And that low-carbon economy is going to impact us in so many ways. Our oil companies are under pressure, and the impact of escalating costs is spreading across so many fronts. Prices of all different commodities, from food to aluminum to steel, cement. For those of you who are building a house today, although that's not too many people, with the state of the housing market, wood, almost every part of building a house, the costs are going up at an incredible rate. Meanwhile, Europe is implementing a low-carbon economy. They're implementing cap and trade, and I suspect the U.S. is likely to follow, certainly after the election. But now is the time for America to get positioned in a way that we can benefit and be competitive in that low-carbon economy. I think the choice is simple. Either we're going to be leaders or followers, but a carbon-constrained economy is something that certainly my children are going to have to live with. Some of you are going to have to live with it throughout the next 50 years. So the need to act is there, and it's critical. But the first step in acting is that I think we have to change our mindset. So my little secret here is that before the end of this century, renewable energy can supply all of the energy needs of the world. By 2100, renewable energy can supply all of the energy needs. Between solar PV, solar thermal, geothermal, biomass, hydro, wind, waves. Between this combination, and with a little bit of extra technology and infrastructure built, we believe that, and let me say it again, that renewables can supply 100% of the prime energy needs. Now, the assumption that our economy has to be tied to oil is simply false. The earth abounds in energy sources, and I understand that unlocking that potential may be more difficult than lighting up oil or coal or gas, but it's that challenge to move away from that premise, to move on that we have to burn our way to prosperity. It's a challenge to unlock renewable energy, but again, we are facing a massive challenge, not only in energy independence, but in climate change. And in my mind, this is a challenge that America has to lead. We just simply must. And I know that sounds here in Washington like a political statement from a company CEO. But to me, it's a whole lot less about politics and a whole lot more about math. And believe me, I like math a lot more than politics. I'm much better at it, for one thing. But since the U.S. is the largest energy user, the largest carbon emitter, and in many ways, we are still the technology and innovation leader in the world, and a country that really rewards innovation, it seems obvious that we should take the lead. And when I travel around the world, I have to tell you, the focus is on us. The world is looking at our habits, they're looking at our trends, they're looking at the policies that are being created, and they are looking at where we're putting our money and resources. I have to tell you, we are not living up to their expectations, and I don't think we're living up to the expectations of the people of America. The world is moving to a low-carbon economy, and certainly that's a big economic change. It's huge. And America has the most to lose, or at least we think we have the most to lose. But I think we have the most to gain. And we have the most to gain if we can position ourselves to be competitive in this new economy. Power generation is the biggest source of CO2 emissions in America. And if we refuse to control our CO2 emissions, I wonder how we can expect China to, or India, or the other emerging economies, because they're racing to get the same standard of living that we have. And believe me, they envy our standard of living wherever you travel. And we can't just do the easy thing of continuing a coal revival, allowing it to go above its current 50% of the electrical generation. As you probably know, it's 80% in China, of electricity supplied by coal. And so if we do, the negative impacts will just be accelerated, and we certainly believe the consequences of that are dire. So how do we get the urgency behind this? The urgency of building and operating traditional power plants certainly is not that easy anymore. Siting a plant, understanding where it can go, getting the issues solved by neighbors, worry about pollution, carbon emissions, threats of accidents, geologic and seismic considerations, and operating costs are certainly going up, making clean energy alternatives much more attractive. Well, you know, in my mind, the energy and low carbon economy sounds like an awfully urgent and pressing issue. Just the kind of thing to stir up action, collaboration, cooperation across parties, but actually not so much. Where is the action? I ask you. And this is urgent. We have to take it urgently. Do we really have to wait for another election for meaningful, positive legislation providing incentives for solar and other forms of renewable energy? I'd like to believe we could act now. Let's eliminate the excuses. One thing that every CEO knows, and I try to tell everybody in applied materials this, is that hope is not a strategy. Hoping something will happen does not get results. And one thing I've learned here in Washington is that doing nothing is not a policy. But that has been the policy response to energy challenge for some time. Fear and difficulty of change, and I don't want to minimize that this is difficult. It is really difficult. This is a change of huge proportions. And getting started is critically important. I just take this example. I'm sure some of you remember a president, Richard Nixon. In 1974, in his State of the Union address, I'll quote, believe it or not, Nixon said this, "At the end of this decade, in the year 1980, the United States will not be dependent on any other country for the energy we need to provide for our jobs, to heat our homes, and to keep our transportation moving." Well, once again, Nixon was wrong. But Nixon had a plan to take the U.S. from being 1/3 dependent on foreign energy to zero over a 6-year period. Perhaps we need to retake that kind of superordinate goal. But what has resulted in, instead of being free of foreign energy supply, today we're 2/3 dependent on imported oil. But in 2008, the debate continues with one of the loudest suggestions to alter the equation to drill more and refine more in the U.S. I think this misses the point. It's not the biggest drillers or refiners who are going to win in the long term. It's those who can figure out how to untether themselves from oil. We have to embrace a new set of assumptions and understand that this is a game-changing situation, an inflection point, if you will, and stop looking into the ground and start looking up, like at the sun. The U.S. has the greatest demand for power and the greatest need for alternatives. And some of the most innovative solutions are here in the United States. But sadly, we're letting ourselves fall behind countries like Germany, Japan, and now what I see happening in China is just the investments are unbelievable. There is no question that the world needs clean, renewable energy to sustain growth. But do we want to be the ones providing it, or like we do today, buy it? We can be the leaders in markets like China and India, who are going to need massive amounts of energy over the next 20 or 30 years. With new clean tech solutions, America can and should be an energy exporting nation, as well as utilize those innovations to boost our low carbon competitiveness here at home. I know that one of the roles of a CEO from Silicon Valley coming to DC is to kind of give you a postcard from the future and explain what we're learning on the leading edge. And among clean tech solutions, photovoltaic solar is a technology whose time has come. Everything we know about the potential of solar is changing as we start to apply the kind of Moore's Law capability that the semiconductor industry has developed to drive down the cost of photovoltaics. This is one of the main messages I want to bring here today. And a lot of decisions and assumptions that are being made about solar are built on some really old data. Innovation in solar is right here, and it's happening before our eyes. The efficiency of solar, the competitiveness, the cost per watt is on a compelling learning curve. New technologies like thin film solar are changing the assumptions, making utility scale solar a real possibility. But we are just starting. We're just starting to explore materials that can capture the sun with greater efficiency, manufacturing efficiencies and productivity to further lower the cost, and ways to make solar cells simpler and easier to install. So I wanted to take a few moments and dispel a few of the myths about solar power, and especially photovoltaics. The first myth is that it's too expensive. Today, in some parts of the world, Norway, it is true that solar energy is too expensive. Rowan mentioned the biggest implementer of solar energy, Germany, using 8 times already the total that the U.S. implements in a year. Germany, by the way, does not have very favorable sun relative to California, Italy, Spain, many parts of China, huge parts of South America, all over the Sun Belt of the world, where more than 2,000 hours of sunshine occur every year. And in applied materials, by 2010, with just the technology we're working on, much less the technology that others are working on, we think that we can bring the cost of producing a kilowatt of electricity per hour down to 10 to 15 cents. That's a significant improvement over where it is today. And in a carbon neutral society, a society where carbon is priced, valued at a market level, it may be the cheapest form of electricity. The second myth is that solar won't work without incentives. I believe that the industry will grow whether there are incentives or not. That's not the issue. It's really the speed of adoption and the location and rate of that acceleration. We see positive impact of incentives in Japan. Japan's incentive has now dropped to close to zero over a 10-year period. They also have more solar implemented than the United States. They also have a sun-challenged geography. But with strong incentives, the U.S. can develop a significant solar manufacturing and service job base, and without that, those jobs are going to be someplace else, in some other country. I can see what countries they are, likely in Germany, likely in Japan, likely in China. The third myth, solar only works during the day, so it'll never be viable. But think about it. We consume most of our energy during the day. We build plants to level peaking. We build gigawatt plants for peaking. For the foreseeable future, and today solar is 0.2% of the total energy landscape, for the foreseeable future, the growth of solar will be just fine taking care of peak load. At the same time, new and old storage mechanisms and transmission technology are coming along to extend the reach of solar into the darkness. And if I listen to some of my friends who are doing plug-in hybrid cars or electric cars, they'd have you believe that we can simply store the energy in millions of car batteries during the day and use it at night. That is a possibility. I'm waiting for them to sell millions of cars. We are not waiting. Accelerating the adoption of solar in the United States and around the world is a big task that requires big solutions. We aren't likely to make solar a meaningful part of the world's energy supply if we are content only to go from house to house and rooftop to rooftop. We need to invest in ramping solar at the utility scale. And utility scale starts at 100 megawatts and goes to gigawatts. Utility scale solar is quite different than the residential rooftop model. Most people think about solar PV, they think about putting a couple of modules on top of a roof. That's very hard to make economical, and if you did it in the entire neighborhood, maybe you get 50,000 watts. You'll have small roofs relative to the space of the house. Bigger house, maybe a few more watts. If you did it in the entire neighborhood, 50,000 watts, if you thought about covering the roof of schools, parking lots, and areas where top of parking garages, with solar cells, you can start to think about creating a megawatt in a neighborhood or in a small town. And you connect that to 5 to 10 megawatts in the area of substations, connect that to a gigawatt in open area like in the deserts of California, Arizona, New Mexico, and are you familiar with New Mexico? Yeah. They have a lot of space in New Mexico, explored a lot of it. Also have 364 days of sunshine. Great location for solar energy. But we need to be smart about how we build out a solar infrastructure. With solar on rooftops, we can produce a little bit of electricity, but it really is utility scale that is going to make the difference. And in order to do that, it's going to take policy. It's going to take R&D and scaling, and that's where government, Congress have to come in. Clearly, our government has not grappled with the problem of being competitive in a low-carbon economy. So while we wait, we're losing our advantage. But if you think how fast solar goes to work, if we start a solar installation today, it will take roughly 3 months to install it, get it licensed, and start producing electricity. A coal or nuclear plant will take, if you're lucky, 7 to 10 years. By lucky, I mean if you can find a site for it. Operating at full capacity, a single 100-megawatt solar factory, a factory that produces 100 megawatts of solar panels a year, can produce 10 megawatts of a 10 megawatt installation in about a month. We've contracted to build a gigawatt solar plant for a customer, and that factory could pump out 10 megawatts in about 3 days. That factory will be up and running within 18 months. The solar industry is moving fast, even if U.S. policy is not. Our solar business has been ramping since we started announcing our products in 2006. During this last year, we contracted to build factories for 2 gigawatt production of solar panels a year. To give you an idea, the capital cost on that is about $2 a watt. So contracting 2 gigawatts is about $4 billion. Sadly, all of that is outside the United States. All is outside the United States. From what I can see, America is poised to fall further behind in solar and renewable energy. I know this is an election year, but you don't hear about the thousands and thousands of jobs, good factory jobs in clean tech being created overseas and not here. And I'm just confining my comments to the factories that we're building for companies overseas. If we take the entire industry, you have to multiply that by a huge factor. Last year, we conducted a Harris poll before I gave the talk at the Senate last year. Roughly 90% of the respondents supported government incentives for clean energy. And that was when gasoline was $3 a gallon. Today, it's up $1, but we've seen nothing. Local and state governments are ahead of the federal government in this regard. More than 30 states and 600 cities have adopted policies aimed at cutting carbon emissions. Yet there is no national policy. For private companies like ours, I have to tell you, complying with a crazy quilt of what's happening in 50 states across the country is very difficult. It's difficult for us to get scale while we're doing that. It's kind of a hassle tax that really inhibits the size of investments that need to be made. So we need a formula to make America the leader in renewable energy and be a leader in the low-carbon economy. It's a matter of pushing forward to make renewables a priority and getting behind them in a big way. And I see 3 major steps, and I think very doable steps. The first is to give energy players the ability to put big amounts of money behind utility-scale investments. If individual electricity consumers are willing to invest capital into clean energy technologies, why shouldn't we make it easy for them? We must enable companies investing in solar manufacturing and other clean energy manufacturing to obtain capital and provide them with incentives to invest in the U.S. and produce clean power here for Americans. This would mean significant loan guarantees from the government for manufacturing and energy installations. And this has a double benefit: clean energy plus high-end manufacturing jobs. But we need to do more, even than that, to level the playing field and attract the renewable energy factories now being built across Europe and in Asia to the United States. We ought to understand exactly the kind of incentives those countries are giving to site factories in their countries. Second, we need to back R&D in a big way that shows we're serious about making progress with renewables. If we hope that innovation can help us get out of this energy bind and really create competitiveness in a low-carbon economy, we have to spend more and allocate more money in R&D. It's proposed that the Department of Energy next year spend about $156 million for solar R&D. Applied Materials alone will spend more than that this year, and we're doing so without the benefit of the federal R&D tax credit. I wonder why I should do it in the United States. As you all know, the R&D tax credit has expired since the beginning of the year. But again, this is a competitiveness issue. And we have to ask ourselves whether we really want to follow or lead. Finally, Congress must pass, and pass now, a long-term extension of the 30% solar investment tax credit with the removal of the utility property exclusion. And I know there's a lot of work going on to pass this bill, a lot of good work, and people are struggling hard to do it. But let's find a way that can pass the bill and get the job done. Because utility scale is the quickest and most efficient way to rapidly grow clean tech infrastructure and drive down costs. Both Republicans and Democrats say they're ardently for this and support it, but we're still waiting. A one-year extension is not the answer. Of course, it's a good idea, but it's not the answer. It doesn't give the reassurance to investors that the credit will be there in a few years. As Roan said, a big installation takes years to install. Talk about gigawatts. These are major projects. So the urgency with which government must deliver a rapid and fundamental strategy to reach a low-carbon economy is growing as we move to a post-Kyoto world. The United States needs to lead, but right now, we're on a path to be a second-tier player in clean energy technology and about to export our future energy manufacturing and our competitiveness in a low-carbon economy. And I wonder, who will be the next energy exporting countries? It looks to me like China is positioning themselves to be the next energy importing country. So we're at an inflection point with clean technology. We must make a choice. Either act now or we miss an opportunity that's bigger than the internet. You know, it's as big as energy. And I know which choice Applied Materials is making. I know which choice I've made personally on this topic. And I know where Silicon Valley is investing an awful lot of money. So I know where they come down on this question. Now we need to see where our government and what America will choose. Energy and the environment are the two biggest social, economic, and engineering issues of our time. America has the ability to make a difference, to control our own destiny, to leverage our strengths to be competitively positioned within a low-carbon economy on a global basis. But hoping that it will happen is not a strategy. Doing nothing is not a policy. Tackling the reality of this challenge and the implications to our country's future competitiveness and tackling it head on is the only way America will win. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much, Mike. Let me open the questions. We've got some time now for questions and comments. Not that I wasn't joking about Arnold Schwarzenegger in California in the sense that he has and his team have proved to be, I think, somewhat wildly innovative in the diplomatic side of things for the state of California in creating lots of, at least visibility raising, if not capacity building. Have you talked to Schwarzenegger's team about a California pilot project on the scale of a California-funded utility, or is there something about this that requires federal action opposed to California pressing out ahead, since it's always since so frequently ahead anyway of the federal government?
Well, I think California is pressing ahead. There's a number of projects. There's a number of solar thermal projects that are underway right now. So I think you're gonna see some action that are pushed both by the state and by PG&E. And I think that's kind of the cooperation that has to happen, the state, the federal government.
Any with Applied in them?
utilities. Not with Applied today.
But possibly
Have I talked to
down
the
road.
governor about that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, cool. Just want to, yes, sir.
Yeah, would you think that a feed-in tariff like Germany, Italy, Korea is a better approach in the long run? It levels the field between individuals and the big utility thing, and it also allows the zero-energy buildings to be possible, because you have to have solar to do that.
Let me just repeat this for the web viewers, and I'm just going to highlight an element. Feed-in tariffs and zero-energy buildings is what the question addressed. Mike?
Well, I think Germany has done a lot more than do the feed-in tariff. They've tried to create a whole system that works for them, including incentives to create jobs for manufacturing. So they've actually, the number is 280,000 green tech jobs at the latest count in Germany. So this has been, and they've invested hugely in R&D in Fraunhofer Institute and the other institutes around Germany. We have an R&D location outside of Frankfurt. So they really created a whole system that starts with R&D, build the manufacturing infrastructure, and then motivate the end use. So their motivate end use is the feed-in tariff. I think their feed-in tariff is awfully rich. It's 45 euro cents per kilowatt hour, so it's gigantic. I don't think anything like that is needed to stimulate demand, although a lot of people are making money in Germany, so more investment is going there because of that. So I do think a feed-in tariff is good, at least ensuring that people could sell their electricity, all the electricity that they generate. I think would be a good thing to do here in the United States. Today, you can generally not have to pay an electric bill, but you don't get paid for generating excess electricity.
We call in Hattie Babbitt, Ambassador Babbitt, who was our former deputy administrator of USAID.
Thank you very much. The real game-changing action in the United States Congress on climate change came with an amalgamation of environmental groups and, very importantly, very large emitters in the United States.
I'm just going to let you do that right for the camera.
One of the really game-changing catalysts in the United States on climate change on the Hill was a cooperation between large environmental groups and very large emitters, something called the United States CAP, Climate Action Partnership. I mean, this is GE, BP, Alcoa, and World Resources Institute and other environmental groups that came together, said in one package, climate change is real, it's caused by human action, we need a cap and trade framework in which to work, and if we have the stability of a known cap and trade system, we, the United States, with our entrepreneurial and innovative spirit, can not only survive but prosper. Mm-hmm. Now, we've got you here talking about solar, and we've got allied materials. Who would you put together on the renewable energy side to really get this issue moving on the Hill with respect to renewable energy?
Applied Materials, but just for the record.
The other major, there are several major companies, the big renewable energy companies in this country. GE is the biggest of them. GE has a huge wind business today. And I think that's the place to start. And I know Jeff is very much a proponent, but having companies like ours, like GE, but there aren't very many big companies in the U.S. today that are focused on. Mostly the solar companies, SunPower, eSolar, Evergreen Solar, and Osra in solar thermal. Those kind of companies can come together. But
do the emitters, though, look at you as rivals? Because I was going to ask a similar question. Jim Rogers, the CEO of Duke Energy, and I were in Brussels, and he said the three numbers he says I most worry about are 3, 12, and 41. Yep. 3 were the third biggest emitter in the country, meaning Duke. 12 were the 12th largest emitter in the world. We're 41st if we were a nation as Duke Energy, we would be 41st in the world, which is interesting among all nations. He says, so this cap and trade is very vital. But others who have been critics of this move say that the emitters are trying to basically build a whole new line of business. So they're criticizing the self-interest portion of the cap and trade system, which I actually don't criticize. But do some of these worry about your success in wind, solar, and others of becoming highly innovative and looking at your industry as a rival industry to what they're trying to do?
Of course.
Yeah.
I think, as you know, Jim Rogers has recently joined the board of Applied Materials. But it's a change. This is a gigantic change for some of the big emitters. They are going to have to solve the problem if we get into a cap and trade economy. And when that happens, and I hope it happens sooner rather than later, and so having urgency behind it, assuming legislation could get passed in 2009 or early 2010, I'd like to see a quicker implementation than what people are talking about today, 0 to 5 years or something like that. But I think we need a forcing function, and I think cap and trade is the forcing function.
I want to go to the very back, but when you meet senators and congressmen, you talk about this and you lay it out. What is their excuse for not moving?
Well, I think you probably understand it better than I do. There's certainly where the money is going to come from. It is real money. It's not tons of money, but it is real money, and with current rules, it has to come from someplace. And the places that it has been allocated in previous attempts to pass have not been popular with the Senate or the administration. The Senate bill that is being looked at is one that would allow increased spending. So this is kind of a back and forth right now between the Senate and House. Everybody wants to do it. It's a matter of finding a way to get the incentive tax credit. But right now, they're only talking about extension, not about long-term extension.
Let me go to the very back here. I'm going to give you the mic because it's Chuck Wessner. I couldn't see. My eyes are bad.
Thanks. Appreciate
Good
it. First, I'd like to compliment you for the strategic view you bring and the call to action. We need that here in Washington. Let me remind you that you'll have to come back. Washington is like football. Having hit the line hard once, it's not over.
I understand. I will be back.
And I'm pleased to hear that. And I'd like to ask a couple of not negative but analytical questions, and then ask you to elaborate on your needs. The first, you said, as many people in Silicon Valley sometimes do, is that the subsidy in Germany was a little rich. That's like saying that D-Day was a little expensive. They're winning, as you described eloquently, with their extensive effort. So, and I'm serious about this, so maybe we need a comparably rich effort. I'm serious. Sometimes my engineer friends in the Valley calculated to the penny that is needed rather than the momentum that is needed.
And we need momentum.
And a second point, I'm from the Academy of Sciences, and when people claim that the Germans have created 280,000 jobs, our accountants can do that too. Just tell me the number you need.
I suppose.
No, I'm serious about that. I think there's some double counting that may
Could be.
Exist there. And then, in a very friendly spirit, I'm not clear what you need. You want some loan guarantees, you need an R&D investment, you need a number in this town on R&D investments, and you usually need to take 3 times what you need, although I defer to you. But, so what's your number on R&D? What's the actual cost on the loan guarantees? What are the regulatory hang-ups that really need to be broken through? And I do stress with encouragement that you need to do more than you think you need in order to win.
Yeah.
Even if it violates, good management practices from your own company, if you take my point.
So maybe if I start, I just,
Thanks.
I wouldn't defend or I wouldn't even try to defend the German numbers. These are just, but I would also agree that their system is winning, and whoever is going to be in the next administration, I think one of the first things they should do is take their energy team to Germany, look at the system, and really examine it closely and take the parts of it that would really work for the United States after a close examination, understanding our system of government and what's possible. On the what do we need, if I really try to itemize this and start with loan guarantees, which I think are needed for major infrastructure projects, I'm thinking 30 to 50 billion in loan guarantees, big numbers. These factories a big factory would run multiple billions of dollars, so you can think about tens of billions, and that may be low.
What are the real outlays, though, in that?
Outlay, this is more
In
loan
loan
guarantees. It's not real
Right.
Outlays. It's
It's not a 30
back-
to $50 billion charge.
No.
So I just wanted to, for those who are listening, this is not, so it's a difference between explicit dollars as opposed to the guarantee of a failure. I just wanted to add that because I think it's important.
Right. It would, in my mind, it would operate much like the Ex-Im Bank, but be aimed at investment inside the U.S. as opposed to investment outside the U.S.
It'd be like an infrastructure bank.
It would be like an infrastructure bank. You could use that for all kinds of different things. If you had that function, you could use it to improve the transmission and distribution network. You could use it for other infrastructure improvements, roads, whatever you thought was important for the country. On R&D, the number has to be multiple billions, and I would put 1 to 5 billion in that range. Money should go to universities. There should be some public-private projects, but to think 150 million in this to go solve a problem of this magnitude or to make movement on this magnitude, Silicon Valley VCs, as you probably know, will spend more than $1 billion funding a bunch of companies that aren't going to work. I mean, some will and be great, but most won't. But that's the VC game. So I think we need the fundamental research and development. Other countries are going to if we don't, and this is part of that. How do we be competitive?
How about consortium? Consortium?
Well, a consortium really has to have a very focused goal, or I think they end up being organizations looking for problems.
I might have a response later on that, but before I go to Victor, I want to refer back to this Brussels forum, which was sponsored by the German Marshall Fund, at which Jim Rogers was there. Our ambassador to the European Union, C. Boyden Gray, jumped all over him at this meeting. I don't know if any of you were there. It was on the internet, and it was fascinating because Ambassador Gray accused Jim Rogers of being really behind on the numbers of what the federal government is doing. And he pulled out a number of $42 billion that the federal government is now spending on a broad cross-section of renewable next energy initiatives. And Rogers responded and said, I'm one of the biggest players in the energy business, and I have no sense of that whatsoever. And there was sort of this big hullabaloo after. And it is interesting. Do you have any sense at all of the so-called $42 billion? I mean, it's an interesting New America Foundation potential project. We're thinking about looking at explicating that level of federal investment in the arena to see how much, I guess, I don't know what a kilowatt you get for the buck, and then to look at these sort of alternatives. To be if you're asking for $1 billion to $5 billion, if the package is so large already, but there's not much sensitivity, market sensitivity in the industry. So, I mean, without, you don't have to take Boyden Gray on, but Rogers was ferociously defending the point that there's almost no sense within the business sector that any of that spending matters.
I mean, if that is the case, then it needs to be reprioritized. That would be my kind of short response on the topic. I don't know where there's $42 billion.
I think Jim Pinkerton here, this would be a great little op-ed, Jim. I don't know, Jim, do you want to make a comment?
No.
No? Okay. Yes, Kunio Kikuchi.
Yes. Thank you. It seems to me that you have been focusing on the efficiency of the supply side, You mentioned Duke Power. Now, Duke Power is generating electricity because there's demand by individuals. Now, I would like to think that the solution to this might be to change the mentality of the individual consumers in this country. For instance, we say you can't eat more than 2,500 calories without getting fat. Now, what is the ideal energy consumption per day, per capita in this country?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question. I know what...
It is mathematical, though.
It is mathematical. I do know that California uses significantly less energy per person than the rest of the country. So part of the energy efficient economy that's been developed in California. I think we look at this, I like to look at it more from an economic standpoint, and efficiency, energy per dollar of GDP or something like that. And we should have a target on the efficiency can do a little bit. But I don't think we have a huge emitting base today. And to keep up with the growth of the economy. And one of the things that's going to happen is that the electricity generation is going to go faster than the economy will grow, because more and more things will use electricity. Cars will use, 20 years, cars are going to use electricity, largely use electricity, pretty sure. There's a huge movement today, or we'll have different kinds of hybrids than we have today, but we're going to see transportation move largely to electricity as the power source.
I'm Victor Basu, consultant in national security policy. I agree with you about the objectives. That is, we want to be the leader in solar energy and its utilization and so on and so forth. But in addition to specific costs that were raised by a question in the back, we need an answer what is really achievable. And here, at the present, we have 7% of total energy consumption in the United States that is renewable energy. How much of it is solar? Solar is only a fraction of the 7%. So what is it that you expect to achieve, and within what period of time, with all these inputs of money that you are talking about? Moreover, there is a price of energy is not constant. There is something new is coming, and namely methane from methane hydrates. It may pull the rug from under the oil industry altogether by reducing the price of the whole thing. And that may pull the rug from under your goals too. So we have to consider and do some comparative analysis along those lines.
The number one thing is to drive the cost down. Our company is very focused, and people in the solar industry and other renewable energy industries are very focused on driving the cost down. There is no question about that. That's when the cost really gets cheaper, and when the fuel-based electricity generation actually has to pay for their emissions. I think the combination of those two events will really allow solar and other forms of renewables to grow gigantically. Now, when will that happen? It happens sometime in the next 10 years. It's hard to predict exactly, but today, most of the, not wind is already at roughly 10 cents kilowatt hour, but wind blows largely at night. It's a different issue. But we see, because these are technologies and they're manufactured technologies, they are susceptible to efficiency and productivity improvements. So we'll see this cost curve keep coming down and keep coming down fast as more and more engineers, scientists work on this topic. But people can get very high solar efficiency, but it's all about cost per watt. And 10 years, I think, we're going to see that crossover, see this thing grow huge. And that's why incentive tax credits help accelerate that time to move.
I know we're getting close on time, but Ron wanted to...
And burning methane does not solve doesn't solve the carbon issue, doesn't solve the climate issue.
I want to address your question and the question in the back with respect to subsidies. When you look at the $40 billion on an annual basis, the vast majority of that goes to ethanol and transportation fuels that are bio-based, which are renewable, which is great, and obviously it's a big issue with respect to energy independence and energy security. When you look at electricity generation, less than $2 billion on an annual basis goes towards renewable energy generation. When you look at fossil fuels, you're talking about $40 billion on an annual basis is subsidizing the fossil fuel industry that is currently enjoying the highest returns of any corporate industry in the history of the world. Okay, so we are subsidizing fossil fuels at $40 billion. We're giving $2 billion to renewables, of which solar accounts for less than $100 million annually. So when we step back and say, gosh, solar is only, a fraction of 1%, that's true. All you have to do is look back at the last 50 years of the way the United States has treated energy in this country. Over $400 billion has gone to the fossil fuel industry, less than $11 billion to renewables, okay? Think about this, 1.2% of all of the energy subsidies over the last 50 years, 1.2% have gone to renewables, and the return is over 100%, meaning we're getting 2.4% of our electricity coming from renewable energy. You get a better return investing on a subsidy basis into renewable energy than you do into the fossil industry. And think about it, we've really only done it recently. The solar tax credits that Mike's been talking about, we haven't had those in years. All right, so John McCain came out yesterday saying, oh, well, we shouldn't support solar tax credits. That's baloney. We haven't supported solar tax credits. Our tax credits expired in 1983, and it wasn't until 2005 that those tax credits were actually reinitiated. What have we seen since 2005? We've seen a full doubling of solar capacity here in the United States. So we know those tax credits work if we put them in place long enough, but the reality is we have not seen that kind of support. And think about this. What Mike's talking about is an 8-year extension of the solar investment tax credits. What happens when you provide an incentive for the oil industry? It's permanent. Every tax credit for the oil industry is permanent. Maybe we should be thinking about that kind of structure for the next generation of technologies like solar and wind and others.
He's good.
Thanks, Rob.
I want to get to closing, but I saw a couple hands go up. Sam, real quick.
I just wanted to ask about, obviously the United States needs to move towards more renewable energy, but what about jobs in the United States? What's the guarantee that these jobs aren't going to continue to go to China and India where they have more engineers and cheaper labor?
Well, there's no guarantees. There's no guarantees in being competitive around the world.
I kind of heard implied in your speech that we needed to get this straightened out, or your firm, which is making a huge gamble on this, will have to chase the business, that won't have a choice.
Our business today, we're a big exporting company, so our base business is 85% export. And right now, our solar business is 97% export. The solar panels are already being made outside the U.S. Very few. The couple of big solar companies in the United States, SunPower, they're building their factories in the Philippines. First Solar is building their plants in Malaysia. eSolar is building their plants in Germany. Those, I think, are the three biggest. Ron, did I get it right? So even United States solar panel companies are moving their manufacturing out. Why? We should solve that. That's my point about leveling the playing field. And these plants are very labor mild. Their labor costs are very low. They're all automated and run, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's really about business-friendly environment.
Any final questions, comments? Well, Mike, I want to thank you very much. I was 2 mornings ago privileged to be with a bunch of bloggers and sort of new media types at breakfast with Harry Reid. And there were about 10 of us, and I asked Reid about how the next administration, particularly if it's a Democratic administration, sort of reclaims optimism, if you will, on a number of these subjects. And what I meant by that is, how do they spend money? Because to some degree, part of the Democratic criticism of the current administration has been spending, and spending a lot and not necessarily getting the multiplier. And the New America Foundation has invested quite a bit in this infrastructure question of how do you go out and look at the next generation, the backbone architecture that helps you leapfrog out of today's economic circumstances into something else? How do you differentiate between high multiplier investments in that backbone and that infrastructure from low multiplier or low return investments? And Reed's response was very interesting, and he did touch on energy. He even said the word solar, you might like to know, and I didn't prompt him. But he did say that we're facing a battle within even the Democratic Party over that question, that the House and Senate are mad, but he said there's not a more important question that he knows of, or a policy regarding both infrastructure and energy infrastructure. And he wasn't saying this to make me happy. This was not that kind of forum. But I do think it's a very, very important debate and struggle, and we are trying to build out a platform, a discussion. I'm very grateful for the folks that are watching on the web and discussion to help do this. I'm grateful for you for doing what you've done now twice for us to help us stay on this discussion. We very much appreciate working with the Solar Energy Industries Association, and thank you very much
Steve,
for being
thanks
here.
so much.
Thank you.